Today we are talking how to speak so that people want to listen. Well, we all want people to listen to us, right? So I'm thinking you must have the right people and the right message for them to want to listen to what you have to say. But we'll get into all of that. But before we dive in, welcome to the bandwidth. I'm Rosie, your video coach and your program and course creator for I'm Doing This, I'm Going Live, and the real secrets to gaining confidence and going live. I help women over 40 gain confidence and conquer their fear of video. This is a three-way conversation. So definitely engage with us, ask us questions. I will interject in between our conversation to read your questions. So we definitely want you to engage with us. If you find value in this video, give it a thumbs up. Check out my other videos, subscribe to this channel, and hit that notification bell. So let's do this. Again, the title of this show is How to Speak So That People Want to Listen. Our guest is Amy, and she is a public speaking coach. So let's welcome Amy to the bandwidth. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Rosie. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for our topic today.
Me too. Like I spoke to you off camera, like we could talk about public speaking all day long because this is something that the audience needs to hear. So I gave a brief introduction. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. So my name is Amy Russo. I've been a speaker, teacher, and coach for more than 12 years. I help professionals overcome their fear of public speaking so they can be leaders, doers, and innovators kind of on their own stages in their own lives, to move from wanting to share, but too afraid, not knowing how, so they can confidently show up for their passion and their career to make that impact that they really want to have. And I really love helping people connect with their purpose and passion in life. That's my passion anyway.
Yeah. And that's something we have in common because that's something that I am so passionate about. Women, especially getting their voices out there, no matter what they want to talk about. So I'm so excited to talk about this. So what's the first step? Is it knowing your target audience? What is it?
So the first step for any speech you give, and let me say, a speech, anytime you speak is a speech. If there's an audience, you have a chance to connect, to motivate, and inspire. So you need to understand who you're talking to, often people think of this as your target audience. Do you, for example, a very basic question is do you share the same background knowledge as your audience? If you use a technical vocabulary, if you're a finance coach and you use words like dividends or things like that, is your audience going to understand that? If you're speaking to someone who's just coming into your area where you educate, coach, teach, or talk about, you need to make it accessible to them. You want to invite the audience in and make them feel included in what you're talking about. Because as a speaker, we want to connect with our audience so they will not only hear and understand, but they'll remember and act upon what we have to share. So that's the first step, is understanding who they are and the level of knowledge that they bring to the topic and how you can include them when you give your speech.
That's good. So how do you do that if you're first starting out? Is that figuring out where that audience already is instead of trying to grow your own at first, because that can take some time?
So a couple ways to do that. So let's say I'm going to use coaches. So if let's say you're a finance coach or maybe a health and wellness coach, what you can do is find people who have a similar niche to you, a similar outreach, and consume their content. And then sit back as an audience member. You can practice your skills as a listener. So what did you like about their presentation? What kind of words, what kind of examples do they use? What kind of stories do they bring up? What resonated you and what did not, particularly if you were your target audience in the past. Very often a coach will be coaching about something that they have personally overcome. So you can see if you resonate with that material. You can find examples where you do and where you don't. Because even if you don't like a speech, there's still something you can learn from it. That speech was meant for someone. So what worked and what didn't is a really good way to start understanding what your audience does. And you take that and you apply it in your own speeches. So maybe, okay, so on Instagram, maybe you're going live or you're posting reels or your stories. What gets your audience to interact? Like, do they click, but do they comment? Do they continue on that conversation? Because the goal of a speech shouldn't end when you stop talking. Ideally, the speech will keep going on and will exist in the interactions and thoughts of your listeners and viewers.
Yeah. And that's especially with like replays, because a lot of time when you go live, you may not have a whole bunch of people tuning in, but the majority of people tune into the replays because we're all so busy, and your time that you went live may not have worked for me. But I remember from your promotions or whatever that you did a live. So let me catch up, or I subscribe or whatever, and I know.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a really great way to think about it, Rosie, that particularly on social media, it's almost like a new form of public speaking, that because our speeches are recorded, that they don't end when we stop, that there's chances for an audience, like, days, weeks, even months into the future can go back. And for them, that is fresh. It is the first time it's happening. So video and going live is a great way to extend our outreach as speakers, content producers, educators. That's a really great point.
Yeah. Now, what about storytelling? I know you said, see what works for others and what doesn't. Is storytelling something that you can do to bring your audience along on the ride?
Oh, yes, it is. I'm really glad that you brought up this topic. So when you're telling a speech, when you want a point to remember, so data is great, okay? And if you use data, people will likely agree with you. But if you don't give them an emotional anchor, they're not going to remember after your speech. And as we talked about, like, our goal is that people like take momentum and energy from our speeches and content to do something in the future. So using a story is a great way to do that, particularly if you make it personal, make it real. So we all have stories or like certain points of view in life that make us like the authentic messenger to share that story. Like a small example would be, so when I was like in elementary and middle school, I was a terrible reader, like really smart student, but like, the teacher would make you read in class. I would be almost in tears because I was so bad and people would laugh at me. Like, I have like since in my 20s and 30s, like learned to be an avid reader. Like, I worked really hard on that. So I was a high school teacher in a previous career. So when I was telling students, like, I know this is hard for you, but like it is possible. And this is what I did because I lived that journey. For them, I was the right messenger. They could believe it because I had done it. So when you use your personal stories and those storytelling techniques, you can make people like remember more because you gave them something to root for. You had like an emotional arc to your story, and human brains are designed to like remember and hold on to like emotional stories like that. So that's a little bit of a long answer, but in short, storytelling is an excellent tool for connecting with your audience.
Yeah. And sometimes I always look out for that, or I catch it when people are doing it, especially if I listen to the podcast, because I'm always listening to a podcast when I'm exercising. And anytime they, use a story, I'm like, okay, I got that, and it does stay with you because you remember the story and then the point that they made afterwards. Yeah. So as far as audience feeding off your energy, you brought that up. Why is that so important that, you don't have low energy or that they need to feed off of you?
Yeah, that's a really good angle to bring up. Particularly sometimes, like, because when I talk to some of my clients, they're like, well, okay, if there was a person in front of me, okay, but when I'm doing a video, there's no one there. So it's really hard. But we have to remember that on the other side of the screen is a real human. And there's a mirroring effect that if the speaker is grounded and confident and gives off that energy, then it's going to be reflected back to them. If you show up with energy and passion, right, that's going to be reflected out, and then your audience is going to reflect that back to you. So even when there isn't an audience immediately there, we have to understand that if you're low energy or you start to get nervous when you're speaking, if you don't look confident on camera, then the audience is sympathetic. They're going to be nervous for you. They're going to be like, oh no, I want to help them. Are they okay? Right? So then the audience won't be listening to your message. They're going to be feeling bad for you. So we have to kind of put out the energy and the stage presence that we want the audience to reflect back. That gives us the best chance to connect.
Yeah, and I have in kind of like chapter in my course about low energy not allowed, because, and it's not fake. A lot of people think, well, I don't want to be fake. But like you said, nobody wants to sit there and listen to you, just low like this, or and no confidence. I just say, boost it up just a little. You're still yourself, but you're not dry. People want to engage and listen because you want them to connect and hear what you have to say. So, sometimes even with me, you're running and you're doing all this, and then I have to get myself together and like breathe and take a moment before I even go live sometimes, because I have to get my energy right, because no one wants to sit here and listen to, be like, yeah, okay. And this is what, no, you have to like boost it up just a tad.
That reminds me of one example I like to share with my clients. I'll do for you right now, because sometimes in public speaking, like you were saying with going on camera, people are like, but I don't want to look fake. I don't want to act. I'm not an actor. I'm like, it's true. You don't have to be, but as a speaker or someone who makes a video, it's your job to try to, as accurately as possible, translate your feeling or your truth to your audience. So for example, I'm going to get a little bit closer to the camera. If I say, I'm so happy today, do you believe me? No, right? Because my voice is flat, my face is like not animated.
Yeah.
So every time you say something, there's 3 levels. There's the words, right? There's your content, but then there's how you sound, and then how you look like, right? And those always happen no matter what. So if you're happy, your words should say happy, your face should say you're happy, and your voice should say you're happy. When you say it 3 times, it makes it much easier for your audience to understand the message you're trying to communicate. So that's how I like to think about it. You say the same thing 3 times, and they're going to get it.
Okay. And now, is that back to back, or that's just during the speech? How does that work?
That's every time you're speaking.
Okay. What, you went out. I'm sorry. You said what?
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're trying to hit all 3 ideally. Most of the time when you're speaking, particularly like when we're making a video, or maybe you're teaching someone, like when you're standing up in the role as a teacher or a presenter, we want to try to as clearly communicate as possible. So you want to think about the sound of your voice. You want to think about how you look, of course, like making your gestures. And you want to, of course, focus on your message. Now, if you have to pick an order, right, because that can be hard when you're first starting out, you focus first on the message, right? First on your words. After you kind of get comfortable with your material, then I would recommend adding more voice, adding energy into how you're talking. And then finally, you want to work on your gestures and your stage performance, like what you physically look like. And when you put all 3 of those together, wow, that's some magic.
Yeah. So I just want to pause now and see if there's any questions. If you have any questions, definitely put them in the chat. We will get to them. Just moving along. So what is the head to heart technique?
So the head to heart technique is essentially like, you want to start with facts, right? You want to start with some like big picture context, but you want to end with heart. You want to end with emotion. You start with facts if you want to be believed, but you have to end with heart if you want to be remembered. So if you only use facts, like I said before, your audience will likely agree. You're like, yes, that sounds very well researched. Yes, I can see why that's true. But they're not going to do anything with the information, because it's really hard for human brains to kind of like understand and like take that in long term. So I also like to think of it as like the head to heart bridge. Like, you must communicate your message in a multitude of ways. So that's kind of like a shorthand. It's like you want to make a bridge between the 6 inches between your head and your heart. And if you do that, your message is most likely to connect and stay with your audience.
So I got the head part, but like the heart part. So it's just, what can you speak more to what that is?
Sure. So I'll do a little mini example to this. So like, it's true that over 70% of the world's population have a fear of public speaking, rivaling even the fear of death. It is one of the most shared human experiences. So that's like the head part.
Mhm.
And the cost of that, the world is being robbed daily of so much of people's ingenuity, creativity, and perspective because they are terrified of sharing their voice. And I know that's true because I was one of them for so many years, because I had been laughed at and mocked in class for how I read and how I sounded, that I just didn't say anything. And you know what? I called myself smart because I'm like, why set myself up for pain? Like, I know what's going to happen, but the cost of that was I was keeping my dreams small and my ambitions contained. And I almost lost the story of my life. So that's one of the stories of why I've started my coaching practice. So I started with like a fact that is so common, but I tried to appeal to your heart by telling you a personal story about how I know this is true. So the idea is that people will be able to better remember that this is like a very human problem, because often people feel very alone in their stage fright, in their fear. They're like, I'm the only other person. Everyone else is fine. They're great. It's kind of related to imposter syndrome, right? But it's actually super shared, and that when we work together, like we can help each other be braver speakers and braver listeners working together. So by ending with heart, you can hopefully get people to remember and act on what you say. And the world can be better. I truly believe the world can be made better if we all, it means all of us, we all got to work together, but it can be done.
Yeah. And I so agree with you about, personalizing it and, having those facts and having those mixtures. So now I totally understand what the head to heart technique is. And it's just needed because a lot of people are just so afraid to start, because they are terrified. And I, remember when I was like that too, and church has helped me, get up in front of audience when I was younger, just to try to overcome that fear. But sometimes you just have to just rip the Band-Aid off and just try it, just do a short introduction that's 90 seconds, that's it, and get off. And you didn't die.
Yeah. That's a really good point to bring up, is like, how do you, like, a natural question is like, but if you're all afraid, how do you address it? Is like, well, you start small. I like to think of it like, what is your nearest Everest? Like, by that, I mean, what is the closest thing to you that seems impossible? So if that 90-minute video, like, oh, whoa, if that makes you like, whoa, right, then that is your nearest Everest. So you need to do it. And then like you said, like, it feels life or death, but it's not. And then over time, you can like build up your courage with those small victories. And it doesn't need to be perfect. I think also a lot of people get hung up on public speaking. It's like they want to write a speech and it has to be 100% what it says. But when you're speaking, particularly with personal stories, there is no wrong way to do it because it's your story. Whatever you say is okay. Like, people should focus on mostly sharing ideas and not worrying so much about the exact words or how it's done. And through that practice, like you said, you got to rip off that Band-Aid and you got to go for it, because over time you collect those small victories and you're going to find yourself with a wealth of courage and stories and inspired people along the way.
Absolutely. Now, as far as format, what would you recommend? Would you recommend writing it out, your speech or whatever message? Would you recommend bullet points or whatever works for the person?
Well, ultimately, it's going to kind of come down to whatever works for the person. But particularly for, like, let's say we're doing like a 90-second video. For something like that, unless you're like writing an ad for Facebook and you have to get every word correct, I would really recommend not writing out, because I find people often get chained by that and they get so hung up. Like, if you forget one like word, then they start panicking, and like that's not helpful for anybody, right? So I like to write, like, I do think about a topic and then like I'll write some bullet point notes, but that's kind of like a roadmap. but I don't have to hit everything. I just kind of find the flow of the conversation. Above all, I would say, like, for short speeches, for short content, you should like pick one story and then you stick to it. It's only got to last for 90 seconds. You commit to that one story. You don't jump around looking for the best one. You just commit to that answer.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm with you. I'm on bullets, but I did start out at first, because I was so nervous. And, I wrote it out and literally read it. And like you said, if you miss something, you're panicking like, oh my God, where was I? Where was I? But then you figure it out as you go along. You're like, okay, that doesn't work for me. Let me try bullets. And I also think that preparing yourself is really important. So you'll think about the topic, you'll write down your bullets, and then you practice, your speech. That will help you. So when you finally go live or you're in a room of people, it will go more smoothly because you're more aware of whatever the topic that you're going to speak about. And it just goes smoother to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So why is it so important to believe the message that you're sharing?
So I think it's really important to believe in your message because you can like authentically tell it. And the audience does, as we talked about earlier, does like reflect your energy. So if you are not the right person for that message and you're just using someone else's talking points, it's going to be much harder to do that. It's not impossible, but it's much harder to kind of tell a message that really isn't yours, that you're not part of that story. So I really recommend, like, everyone has really great stories in their life. So I like, before people start writing speeches, like an activity you can do is like, what were your, like, looking back through your whole life, like, what are things that really stood out to you? Like, when's a time you were afraid or you helped someone? What's the best advice you ever received? What are challenges you have overcome? And I promise you, everyone has those stories. And sometimes people think, oh, but mine aren't so grand or unique. I haven't like overcome like a massive thing in my life. But the smallest things can be so moving to people. It's like, what did that mean to you? And how did that change how you act and live in life? The truest stories you can tell are sometimes the smallest, most personal ones. And they can make a really big impact on other people because they're relatable. People can look at that and be like, yeah, like if you tell the story of like an honest heartbreak, maybe, or like maybe you ask someone to dance in middle school and they said no in front of the whole school, right? So that's not a life-ending event, but people can relate. They're like, oh, I've been that person. And when they connect, you have a chance to really move them with your message. So that's at least like how I like to think about it.
Yeah. And I know some people would say, but I'm private. I don't have any stories I want to share. But you're in control. Like you said, if you go back to like a high school dance, it doesn't have to be something super personal, but just get it. It will help your message. It will help you come across better to your audience. And like I said, just think about something, it doesn't have to be something fresh. It could be something from, way back or something funny. I think if we all reflect, we can find something that we can share, because I'm a private person too. But, some things are funny that happen to you. Like if you're driving down the street and you see something or something, you experience with your children or something like that you could share. But I just wanted to put that in there because I hear that often that people, I'm private. I don't want to share stories.
That's a really good point to bring up. Another thing you could do if you don't want to share personal stories, maybe talk about things that you found moving, talk about books, podcasts, stories you've heard from other people. They don't have to be your story, but if they emotionally affected you, like maybe you started doing something differently after you heard a news story. You're like, wow, a news story inspired you to take action. I just made that up and I really want to know what happened because of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can think about, like you said, or just driving down the street, like, what did you see? Did you stop at someone's lemonade stand because you wanted to support this little girl and her new business?
Yeah.
That would be a great story, right?
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said that, because that does matter. It doesn't have to be your story. So yes, I'm so happy that you shared that one. So we kind of like talked about the pros. Now, why are some reasons why your audience won't connect to your message?
Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. So you can be a great speaker, you can have a great message, you can be authentic in sharing the story, but sometimes you're just not going to be the right person for this particular watcher or viewer to connect with. And that's okay. There's a lot of different people out there, particularly on the internet, right? We have access, like we have no idea who's going to watch this, pretend like lots of very broad audiences. So even if you're like your Instagram is super targeted at your group, right? It does, you could get other people who watch it, and you can't write a speech, just like you can't make a product for everyone. Like for example, like because I've been learning about finance recently. So I've been looking at all these different like finance YouTubers, and a lot of them I feel really unincluded by. Like they're talking about, so they're like, yeah, just take your small investment of like just $10,000 and you could do all of these things. I'm like, $10,000? I'm like, I don't know who can just throw around $10,000. But the people who I am listening, but like they weren't imagining that I was listening to them. So I felt excluded. Now, does that mean those are bad YouTubers or bad speeches? No, but they're not going to be attractive to someone like me. While other YouTubers focus on like women, like people who are investing for the first time, people who have maybe not a lot of like financial education before, you know, and like they're talking about like, okay, hey, maybe you can start with like 100 or 500 or $1,000. And so when they talk like that, then I know that those techniques can include me. So maybe the $10,000 technique could include me, but the number is so like unsuited for me that I don't know, right? So you have to like target your speeches to fit who you want to reach. But like when we're online, you have to realize that it's not going to reach everyone. So like there are ways we can be more inclusive in our content. But again, you don't want to try to make something for everyone, because then you're going to make something for no one. So that's why, to actually go back to our first question, is whoever is your primary audience, right? So if maybe if you were that finance or YouTubers, like I want to help new moms or college graduates with investing, then talk about things that new graduates and new moms face. Use smaller amounts of money. Maybe you talk about like, how do you invest also for your children, right? So you pick things that are going to resonate for them, you know? Yeah. So those can be ways to connect with your audience, and why audiences don't connect. And just because someone doesn't like your video, the internet is a big place. Not everyone's going to like your video. And that is okay. That is to be expected. As long as your audience is resonating well, connecting, and like finding your material useful and inspirational, I'd say you're really on the right track.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, and the time has flown by. I'm like, oh my God. So the last two questions: how can people stay connected with you, and what's next?
So you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. My account is Public Speaking Works, all one word. And if you are a professional looking to overcome your fear of public speaking, you can DM me Thrive. I have several positions open up every month, and I would love to talk to you, and kind of like what's next